Okay, let's go ahead and get this party started. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Ivory Bennett, and I am Youth Voices Rising Program Manager. I also have 17 years of lived experience in foster care from the ages of 4 through 21. And I'll share more about myself as we get into our conversation a little bit later today. But I just want to give you a brief introduction about FMC and YBR. So Fostering Media Connections publishes media and journalism to lead the conversation about child welfare, youth justice, and youth homelessness in America. Youth Voices Rising is a media training program for youth with lived experience in foster care, juvenile justice systems, and/or homelessness. FMC launched the program in 2016 to help youth gain the skills and confidence they need to articulate the policy and practice changes needed to improve the system, because they are the experts on what solutions might work. Today, we're going to explore the connections between foster care and cyclical oppression. We're going to discuss how vulnerable foster youth can be exposed to unhealthy dynamics before, during, and after care, and how this could lead to the possible removal of their children, creating a cycle within the foster care system. Furthermore, we're going to discuss ways to identify and recognize red flags and behaviors, coping mechanisms, and even family dynamics early on, which could ultimately also break the cycles. And so, in saying that, I would love to introduce to you today our lovely, lovely, lovely panelist, Deborah Denzel. Deborah, without further ado, please let the audience know who you are.
Hello, thank you, Ivory. So my name is Deborah Denzel. I now am the Business Development Manager for Fostering Media Connections. But before I joined FMC, I too have lived experience. I grew up, aged out of the Connecticut foster care system. I am also a social worker. So I've been a foster parent, recruiter, trainer, manager, program manager. I've been a foster care worker and a researcher. So I've worn lots of different hats, and I have a perspective, lots of different perspectives of our child welfare system. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm happy to be here today and to have this discussion.
I'm so excited. I hope that y'all can feel my excitement because I just feel like we're going to have a wonderful discussion today, and we're going to keep it real and authentic about our not only lived experiences, but our professional experiences that kind of feed off of one another and just create a really beautiful gift, in my opinion. So we're going to break it down into 3 different parts. I want to look at the past, we're going to look at the present, and then we're going to look at the future. So let's go ahead and start with the past, our time that we spent in foster care. Our first question is, can you share with us a bit about why and or how you ended up in the child welfare system?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. So my experience, before I can even discuss how I ended up in the system, and I always share this, which is ironic of what our topic is today, but I refer to the cycle. I refer to the generational experience of foster care. So my biological mother actually grew up back in the day, aged out of the system. And so you fast forward 5 children later, a single mother. At the time of when I went into foster care, I was about 8 going on 9 years old. We were in extreme poverty, experiencing lots of homelessness, and essentially that homelessness, that poverty cycle, resulted in me. And at the time, my brother, I'm the youngest of 5, my brother and I went into foster care. My older sisters were older and out the home at that point. And so that's how I went in, why I went in to the system.
Thank you for sharing that. We have so many similarities in our stories. And I was 4 years old, I believe, the first time I was put in foster care. And it's because my mother had bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, just really extreme mental illness, right? And at the time that I was in care, because we're elders in the foster care world now. I'm 33 for those who are wondering. And so at the time, there wasn't policies and procedures that kept kids from kind of cycling in and out of foster care itself. So, my mom would get better for a little bit. So we'd leave foster care for a few months and then go back after she started getting sick again. And that kind of happened on again and off again for about 17 years. And so, and also my father, he was just not present by choice. And my family, I don't know what they were doing. We're going to have a conversation about that coming up, sure. But that's how I was in foster care. And I was also in foster care with a sibling who I got to be in foster care the majority of my time with. So I think that was definitely positively impactful for the most part. I also want to state that I was in foster care in Western Pennsylvania across 3 different counties. 2 were rural, 1 was urban. And I was in about 12 different K through 12 schools too, just to kind of give you a scope of like the experiences that I had while I was in care. So our second question is, when you think about generational impact on our lives, right? And we've kind of already touched on that. So things like epigenetics, generational trauma, cyclical behaviors. What are some cycles that you have noticed within your biological families or chosen families?
Such a great question. And I think that, so one that was already stated, one of those cycles was my biological mother was in foster care. I ended up in foster care. And I mentioned that I have 4 siblings. When I went into foster care, my brother went in. We were in different placements. Our stories are vastly, dramatically different. And at the time of going in foster care, my 3 older siblings, they had children, young children who are around my age, a bit younger, but around my age. Their children went into foster care. And since then, right, this is like 20 years ago, I'm still somewhat in contact with my biological family. And I have witnessed not just my nieces and nephews who have experienced foster care, but now they have children who have experienced foster care. So it is generational. And so that still exists within my family of origin, that cycle of poverty, that cycle of all that comes out of poverty, that's which part of that is ending up in the foster care system. And one of the things that I'll share here is, and there's, sometimes Ivory and I, we chat and there's so much to share and it can get so overwhelming because you're so passionate and there's so many ideas. So I try not to get ahead of myself. I try to tone it down a little bit, but
We have time today.
one of the things that I think about is something that maybe one of the things we don't think about. And I don't know exactly how to label it. So there might be some attendees who know exactly what I'm saying. And so feel free to interact in the chat and say, yeah, I know what you're saying. And you have a name for it. But one of the things is kind of communication. So although I grew up and aged out of the foster care system, my mother's parental rights were never terminated. And I was never available for adoption. So I kind of lingered in the system my whole life. And I maintained, partly by force, by expectations of the system, a relationship with my biological mother. And that caused its own trauma, that caused its own issues. But one of the things that it caused me is this feeling that I had to communicate no matter what, right? People always say, it's your biological mother, it's your family. But sometimes, yes, that is true. But when it's unhealthy, when it's toxic, when it does you harm, do you maintain that relationship? And it wasn't until actually Ivory joked and said, we're older. It wasn't until my early 30s, literally like my 30th year, that I recognized I needed to end that relationship. So I had, again, been forced into this relationship, part of which I felt guilty to have, part of which I did want to have. But I recognized that it was unhealthy. It was toxic. It was one-sided. I didn't feel like I was getting much out of that relationship, and it was doing me a lot of harm. But I through the work of working with a therapist at 30 years old, I was able to determine to put myself first, to put my health first. And so that's another cycle that, you know, in recent years that I've worked through. And I'm sure there's more things, right? Right now I don't have a family of my own. I don't have children. But I hope that when I do have children, that all that I have learned through my own experiences, including the lived, but also the professional, my education as a social worker, working in this field, that I break additional cycles and prevent additional trauma, being a mother one day. So that's just a few things.
I mean, we're going to talk about that. Trust me. We're gonna definitely get there. And thank you for sharing. I'm just always so astounded by the bravery and the courage of everyone I interact with on this platform. So thank you for being so open about that. And when I think about generational impact, one, I want to redirect the audience to just this thought. When children are removed from their homes, the state becomes their parents, right? Like our mommy and our daddy is now whatever state that you live in. So for me, it was the state of Pennsylvania. And, you know, the responsibility of parents is to make sure that children are getting all of the safety and the boundaries that they need as well. And I think, like Deborah, what you spoke to kind of talked about or alluded to the issue of like boundary crossing and that not being supported or recognized and facilitated. And don't get me wrong, parents, biological parents have rights and everything, but also children have the right to feel safe and to be healthy and to be considered before they might even know what that looks like or means. And so I think that's just something, if you're a practitioner on here and you know that, you know, your client has a really tumultuous relationship with someone who they're forced to interact with, just think about that. Think about that, ask questions about it, be curious about it. Ask yourself, you know, if that was your child or your niece or your sister, you know, would you make those same decisions and allow that to continue? So, all right, back to my business. So, generational trauma in my family is vast, to say the least. And I don't like telling people stories without their consent, so I'll try my best to not do that. But there is a lot of mental illness and just unhealthy mental and emotional spaces within my family dynamics, actually on both sides, but up until the 19th year of my life. So for the first 2 decades of my life, I didn't even really have access to my father's lineage. So when I say family, I'm mostly speaking about my mother's side, my biological mother's side of my family. Just a myriad of mental illnesses that have led to like hospitalizations and medications. Both of my uncles had experienced the Vietnam War. And so, you know, things like PTSD, the drug addiction that came with that era. And then when you think about cyclical oppression, racism, my family experienced so much severe racism. My cousin, someone who's not even 10 years older than me, had a cross burned at her high school. You know, the KKK has terrorized people in my family for generations. It is a very real thing that I've lived with in my own physical life of 33 years, and that has been ever present in the various generations of my family too. And so all of those can definitely degrade anyone's emotional and mental health and well-being. But especially, I feel like there is an addition to having mental illness and in taking not blaming the person affected by it, right? Like not making them responsible for that. Rather, there's been a lack of resources to support those who need it the most. A lack of resources in terms of there's no social workers, there's no one talking through, you know, responsive plans that can help be proactive and that can be supportive when someone's having an episode. There has not been a lot of like parental development. Let's be honest, parenting doesn't come naturally and easy for everyone. And so I've noticed that that has not been something that has necessarily been passed down intentionally. And of course, you have cyclical behaviors like, you know, secrecy. Oh, we're not going to talk about that person who's not well. We're not going to talk about that thing that happened to our family back in 1954 that does affect us, but we're not going to share it. And so just an unwillingness to have conversations about the things that really do impact us long term, the things that do show up in generation after generation, if they're not discussed. And again, y'all, we're only talking about my mom's side right now. So on my dad's side, I'm still learning about that, and I'm still asking the questions and trying to find the answers, which has proven to be incredibly difficult. But long story short, again, people not getting the help that they need and having the resources in place to take care of themselves, and therefore they're not able to take care of their children or the other children in their family cycles. So,
and I'll just, if it's okay to jump in.
Yeah, go for it.
And yeah. Oh man, it's always so much to say. So I couldn't agree more. And it goes back to the discussion of preventative work that we need to do in our society. And, what does that look like? I really think back about my life, and I think back to even my biological mother's life, and even her parents' life. And I just think about, imagine if there were preventative resources, really good resources that existed, it could have stopped. And unfortunately, I did have to go into the foster care system. And I know we'll talk about some of this later, but I had access to a ton of resources that my biological brother, who came into foster care, did not have access to, that my nieces and nephews who were returned home to my siblings didn't have access to. My biological mother back in the day didn't have access to. The policies didn't exist, the resources didn't exist. And so because I was a part of the system, I had access to resources, I had mentors, I had all of this to help me break this cycle. But imagine if similar resources existed on the preventative side, how it could have prevented so much trauma. It could have prevented, we know what preventative resources are and what they can do. So to your point, yeah.
I think that proactive support is crucial, right? And I think that realistically, we understand that how a lot of agencies operate, how a lot of funding is given is contingent upon not proaction, but reaction. And that is a really, really unfortunate thing, because how many families could just use housing assistance? How many families could just use food assistance? How many families could just use literacy assistance? It doesn't have to be removal from the home. It doesn't have to be kids are put into foster care. It doesn't have to be, oh, now they're going to get adopted because you couldn't get your stuff together in the 18 months that we told you you had to. It's so deep. And it really made me think too, Deborah, as you were speaking about, I asked myself this question: were there any cycles that I'm aware of that maybe my mother and grandmother actually did break and I'm not giving them their flowers for? And I think that, well, I know that one of them was like physical violence. So my grandmother used to say that her father would be very violent towards the whole family. And I just remember ever since growing up, she would tell me about just him being very, very violent. I was never beaten as a child. I can't speak for what happened to my aunts and uncles because I wasn't there. But I'm thinking that they didn't have the same experiences that my grandmother had because of the experiences she had and because she didn't want to perpetuate that for her children. Now, I could be wrong. If something comes out and they talk about that, then I will gladly correct myself. But I can recall not ever experiencing that kind of physical punishment as a child from my parents, from my aunts or uncles, and actually from many of the homes that I was in. Now, that's not the case for everyone, unfortunately, but that is the case for me. And that is one cycle that I could see has been broken. When I have children in the future, and we'll talk about that more, I don't plan to punish my children with physical means. I don't agree with that or participate in that for many, many reasons. But that is the thought that I had. So Deborah, can you think of any cycles that might have actually been broken before your generation?
Absolutely. So I know that my mother disclosed to me years ago some of the other forms. So she and her siblings had experienced poverty. I'm not going to call it neglect, but poverty. But I know that, again, I also can't speak for her brothers and sisters, but for my mother, I know that she has shared there were other forms of abuse and some neglect that she also experienced, both with biological family and foster homes. And fortunate enough, I did not experience, that with my biological mother, within the home of my family of origin, or in my foster homes. Also, my mother, so again, I'm the youngest of five. My mother, although she may have struggled, although it may not have been perfect, she raised my siblings, my three older siblings, my three sisters, until they became of age. So they didn't enter the foster care system, right?
Mhm.
And it wasn't until my brother and I, at a later time, we entered the system. And it was at the time, and we hadn't entered the system up until that point because she had been able to take care of us. She ended up losing a job, and that became a cycle of living in shelters and bopping around, and her not being able to find housing and really needing the resources, and she wasn't able to get all of the resources she needed, so that resulted in us being homeless and ending up in foster care. But in a sense, right, with my siblings, she broke that foster care cycle.
Mm.
And I look at my sisters who are very grown now and who have, again, children who are around my age, who also have children who are my great nieces and nephews. And I always get so proud, although we're not close, we're social media friends. That's how it's always been. And thank God for social media with this aspect, because I've been able to kind of keep tabs. We've been able to keep tabs on one another. So, anyways, I've been able to see how they have finish high school, maybe need to go back and get GED, how they have continued on to either a certificate program or community college. And, even looking at my current generation, and I apologize, the train is coming by and it may be very loud. So I'll finish this quickly,
You're
and
fine.
say, I also, just want to acknowledge my generation and the generations after who continue to, and who still live in the very city we grew up in, but and experience similar poverty, but they're still breaking cycles. Okay, I'm gonna mute myself.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. We didn't hear it that much. I did hear a few little toots and beeps, but it wasn't anything disruptful. Speaking of social media, this is just a tangent. But what a godsend it has also been for me. I found two of my siblings on social media. I found my brother on MySpace when I was like 17 years old, and I found a sister in 2020 on Ancestry.com. So social media has definitely been crucial and critical for me in building my sibling group up. And I think another cycle, Deborah, that you mentioned with like the different generations that we're breaking is actually having healthier relationships. So like our communication is better. We are working to have conflict resolution, right? We are working to be just loving of one another, holding each other accountable, being loving with one another. So I have been incredibly, really grateful for that and how my generation is showing up to push against those things that I think also in the long run will help when we do start having children, because I know that if anything ever was to happen to me, my children wouldn't necessarily end up in foster care. They would go with their aunties and their uncles, and so I think that's another critical element of the conversation. For people to end up in foster care, there's some kind of breakdown of the bigger family structure usually, and that how could we strengthen that, I guess, is a question that I have. But so before we move on from the past, is there anything that you think you would like to share about the past, our time in care, that period in your life and your development before we move on to currently how we are?
Yeah, I'll share one final experience. So, as you said, Ivory, there's always so many similarities that we find with other alumni and those who have experienced the system. And there's also, so many differences. And so I too connected, did the ancestry online experience and tried to reach out to some biological relatives. And I had a different experience than yours. I got confirmation. Okay, let's see how can I even explain this, because I haven't articulated this before. So through communicating and connecting with some others, I was able to find names and do, your little Google search or find them on social media. I connected with a few folks, and there were some who confirmed like we are related. And then there were some that I got to see the way that they communicate and how unhealthy and toxic and similar that it is to my biological mother and my biological brother. And mind you, some of these relatives don't have a relationship or communicate with my biological mother or brother. And so it was an experience of confirmation of, wow, this is deeply rooted within my family of origin. Which, so I share this experience because I think that we could all have vastly different experiences, especially when locating family. Like I think I've always secretly had this dream that I would find a biological aunt or grandparent or cousin or someone who's just so successful in all the ways, including,
A daddy Warbucks.
well, that, but also with communicating, and we have similar beliefs and morals and values and all of that, but that too. And so when I did locate some of these relatives and that wasn't the experience, that was a little tough to process. But also that was during the time just a couple years ago where it was further confirmation of like, it's deeply rooted, analyzing all of that, and then coming to terms of like, I have to create these boundaries. So I created boundaries with these new relatives that were like, new in my life, who were communicating and saying things and the way that they were saying things, and needing to have boundaries also with my biological mother and brother and ending those relationships. So that was my experience with finding some extended family that I didn't know existed.
Well, I'm going to hold out on hope that one day you'll find at least one person in your family who is going to have some of those markers, because it's possible not everyone you're related to is even born yet. So I'm going to cross my fingers and hope for the best for you. But it does bring up another point. I think that if you are working in child welfare and you have access to support youth who are having these experiences with their disconnected family members, or just, not. You mentioned something, Deborah, and it reminded me, for a long time, I didn't even know what my father looked like. Even though I don't like him as a person, I think that it's important to at least know who your parents are. It's important to at least see other people who might look like you, even if you don't like them, even if they're unhealthy, even if they're toxic. I think it helps to establish your own identity and give you a better foundation to stand on. Now, whether or not you want to repeat those behaviors and cycles is your choice, but I think that it's an important part of self-actualization, if nothing else. And so in saying that, if you have the ability to help youth get DNA testing or trace their families, that sister I found, she lived right down the street from me my entire childhood. How crazy is that? Because that could have been one more ally on my side, on my team, who I grew up with, one more person who loved me, one more person who I loved. Like, it could have positively impacted both of us, because I think she actually experienced care herself. And so I think it's important to give youth access to these tools to find their family members, but also give them the social emotional intelligence training and classes and support to be able to identify if their relationships are healthy and strong, or if they need to have those boundaries and step away to take care of themselves and their futures. So, all right, we've gotten through the past in 30 minutes, 33 to be exact. Let's go ahead and move on to the present. So we are post-transition age. We have aged out of the system successfully. I am 33 years old at this point. I have a master's degree. I've lived across the country. We both have traveled all around the world. So now that we're at this stage in our life, when you think about the context of cycles that we've seen, that we've personally experienced, let's start there. So what have been some major adversities that you faced during and after the aging out process alone, when you think about that period in time?
Hmm.
I
think
mean, and I
I
can,
I was gonna say, do you want to answer that first? I think I may need to think a little.
yeah, I can help out. So aging out was awful for me, y'all. That's just it was literally I aged out after the worst year of my life. I was still in college. I was a sophomore at the University of Pittsburgh. That was the year that my mother almost died. That was the year that my brother's biological mother actually did pass away. I had a terrible romantic relationship with someone who was also in care. We can have a whole nother conversation about that. I was an RA. I had like I think 15 to 18 credits per semester. It was just insane. I had a whole bunch of jobs. And on top of all of that, I had to age out. And I was not ready. I was not ready to lose my health insurance because I have a chronic illness. I have a very expensive chronic illness. And so not having health insurance, it's going to cost you thousands and thousands of dollars a month just to maintain what I have going on with type 1 diabetes. So when I aged out, I had wonderful independent living staff. I will always lovingly speak of them, talk about them, Miss Heather, Miss Cherie. Y'all know who you are. You know that I love you. You were awesome. Ward Home was the best IL program in the city of Pittsburgh. Fight me if you don't believe it. All right. They were awesome and they helped me plan and age out as best they could. But let's be honest, when we talk about that proactive approach, when we talk about that proactive care, some things are beyond just an independent living program, right? What I really needed was access to Medicaid. What I really needed was knowing that there would be a support system that would leave with me, right? Not like get out of foster care, goodbye, but like who are the people that I call when I need help? And also, at the age of 20, you don't know what you don't know. So you can think you're grown, but you're not grown. You're not grown. You don't know everything that you don't know. And so aging out was really, really challenging for me. I feel like, long story short, I didn't get to have the fun that people got to have at that age. I didn't get to feel a sense of security. I was very, very, very stressed out, not only as someone who had aged out, but also as a big sister. My younger sister was going through a lot of stuff at that time. Um, and just all the things that I shared before, they were really, really, really heavy. So it was not, aging out was difficult. I had support, but it wasn't enough. And it was very, very, very difficult. And on that, I will pass it back to you, Deborah. So do you have anything that you would like to share yet?
Yes, of course, of course. And thank you for sharing, Ivory. So I oh I know we're talking about the aging out process, but I just want to I want to like rewind just a little bit because it impacts that aging out. And so I attended Bennett College for Women. It's an all-female, one of the only two all-female HBCUs in the country. And I discovered Bennett College through a Connecticut Department of Children and Families college tour, HBCU college tour we went on. And that changed my life. Right. And so when I was a transition age youth, I took advantage of some services when it came around money. I played no games. I did all the savings programs. I had like 20 something $1,000 saved up before I finished high school. I worked a couple jobs. When it came to certain things around being successful, around finances, and taking advantage of certain resources, I had that. But when it came to my education, horrible GPA. Did not attend much of high school. And so I share this because I didn't think I would go to college. And if I did, I thought I would do what those around me did in Bridgeport, which was go to the community college and stay local. But it was on that college tour that the DCF did that exposed me to Bennett College, and Bennett College changed my life. Okay. So the resources to help me become knowledgeable is shout out to DCF. The resources to pay for me to go, shout out to DCF. Like all of these resources so that I could be there. But the actual college, shout out to Bennett College, because it was what nowadays a lot of colleges are starting to do, which is this wraparound service. So I had the funding to go away to college at the time. But the state didn't provide this wraparound service, but the college did. The college created an environment where I had sisters, I had big sisters, I had little sisters. I had support academically. I had, you name it, what you think a foster youth in college needed. I really had that support. And so yes, so is to share a bit of my experience at Bennett, and again highlighting that now we've transitioned in many locations. And most of my work is in the state of Michigan, where the state of Michigan's different colleges, university do a phenomenal job with this wraparound services for our youth. So when it was time for me to age out, I was finishing Bennett. And I did a post-bac program of research before I transitioned into graduate school. And at the time, I didn't know exactly what I would do in graduate school. But my focus at the time was to set myself up. So I think I joined these academic institutions. I joined these programs that provided the structure, the resources that I needed, that if I wasn't a part of Bennett College and maybe a different college, or if I didn't do that post-bac program that paid me to do the research, that prepared me for applying, but also attending graduate school, like if I didn't have and gave me healthcare, I couldn't imagine what that aging out time period would have been. But I had those resources, I had those opportunities. And then the last thing I'll share is, it didn't mean that things were perfect though, right? I think what I could have benefited from, what could have made all of that transition much smoother, is I did have some mentors in my life, but I think I could have had more support with that. I could have had deeper connections with people who could have showed up for me more often, or just period, could have just shown up for me in different ways, either physically shown up, financially, emotionally, and the little things, like when I graduated, transitioning to the new state, moving in, setting up, all of those kind of things. Oftentimes people have family that can help them, people have mentors that could help them. So while I had mentors that could help me with bits and pieces of my life, sometimes I didn't have mentors who could show up, and that could end up impacting your mental health, right? It could impact your emotional well-being. And oftentimes during that time, it was this sense of loneliness and this sense of abandonment and some other things that were triggering. So both can happen at the same time. You could look at someone and say, wow, they're being so successful, they're accomplishing so much, they're doing this or that. But how's their other areas of health? And I think those are some areas that could have been helpful.
Again, you made me think about so many different things, right? And this is why we could have conversations for days. And yes, I saw in the chat someone saying we were missing parents. We were absolutely missing parents. I mean, think about things that our peers weren't thinking about. When it came to graduation parties, we were planning the graduation parties for ourselves. We were designing our own graduation invites. It wasn't like some loving grandmother or some auntie or some mom. We had to scour to find pictures of ourselves as babies to put on our graduation cakes, if we even had graduation cakes, right? And I don't know about you, Deborah, but I found that my biggest support systems, the people who physically showed up to do that support and that love and that work, were my peers. So either my siblings and or my friends. It has never truly been people older than me or elders in the community or older mentors who have shown up in that work. It's been people my age, which I love them and I'm thankful for them and they're still in my life. But there is something to be appreciated about elders and the wisdom that they bring and the comfort that they can bring. You also mentioned something else, right? And I think we would be remiss to not bring this up in this conversation. There's a reason that you and I are successful. We had different gravitations toward different coping mechanisms, right? And forgive me if I speak for you, I don't want to try my best to do that, but I'm seeing similarities in our stories and in our experiences. success being one of them. You know, I allowed success to be a coping mechanism. Well, you know what? I'm just going to achieve my way through this trauma and stress. So, you know, I can go get that award. I can't control my family dynamics, but I can control my GPA. I can't control, you know, how my dad doesn't show up in my life, but I can graduate, right? And I can go to a certain school and a certain college. Also, shout out to Bennett College. So people should look more into their program if they haven't already done so, because it sounds like a very supportive place. And then also I want to think about breaking cycles, Deborah, because we don't give ourselves enough credit and enough flowers. We were in school at a time when necessarily foster kids weren't getting to go to school for free, you know? And so we still, even not having that immense financial support and support of the state, put ourselves through education and graduated with not only just one degree, but multiple degrees. So that is a cycle that we broke, like, on our own.
And
Like,
I just got to add a comment there. When I was in college, the policy changed during these 4 years. I went off to college, and the policy at the time was they would financially pay for no cap amount for someone, for an alum, aged out youth, undergraduate and graduate school. Then when I started college, it was undergraduate. Then while I was in college, like every year I kept getting informed that there were changes. And so, and then it was, they would still pay for out of state, but there was a cap. So I got to finish my senior year, thank God for scholarships and other opportunities, because that funding changed, those laws changed, it decreased so much. And flipping hats for a second, as a social worker, as someone who's knowledgeable of the child welfare system, I also understand why some of that had changed. Lots of it changed because the funding wasn't being used, so they allocated the funds somewhere else. So I always see both sides. But as someone who was impacted by it, I barely got out of undergrad because, woo,
oh my goodness. Remember that year I told y'all about when my mom almost died and I was aging out? That year put me 1 year behind at my university, because there were only specific classes that could be taken within specific time frames, and I had a dual degree. So because of that year, I was still in foster care. I was somehow my mother's guardian ad litem, her medical guardian, and an active foster youth, like, so strange, right? But because of that, I had to have an additional year in college. And I had a lot of scholarships and grants, but that year alone was like $55,000. So, you know, and that was also a time period where I had been advocating since I was a teenager. So I'd been talking about giving foster youth access to free undergrad degrees for years and years and years. I believe literally when I graduated, it was a few months later, literally a few months later, when they passed it so that youth in Pennsylvania could go to school for free. And I believe that my school would have been one of those schools, but they did not grandfather clause me in. So I still have that $55,000 I have to pay for, which is more like, you know, with interest. We're not going to talk about that. But I say that to say we broke the cycle. We made it through. I love that these babies can go to school for free now. Y'all are welcome for the OGs who fought for that, because all of us didn't have that starting out. But we broke those cycles. We really did. And just for a few of you, the numbers might feel a little bit off, but if I'm not mistaken, only about 3% of foster youth who actually graduate from high school nationally go to undergraduate colleges or universities. Of those 3%, and this is nationally, so that's about 400,000 people a year in foster care. Of that 3% who graduate high school and go to college, about 2% of those people actually graduate with degrees. And it's even less for when you think about advanced degrees and beyond. So, you know, we're a small number, but we're a mighty number. And I just want to pat ourselves on the back, because look at us for making it and continuing to make it. So good job with that. I also have a question to ask you, Deborah. So what is the history in your family of, like, degrees in education? Like, were you someone who broke a cycle of that within your line as well?
yeah, I did. Yeah, no, not to my knowledge. Again, so because my biological mother grew up in foster care, she knew some of her family history that she shared with me. My biological father, I met him twice in my life. And he actually passed away when I was at Bennett College in undergrad. And I know very little about his family, only what my mother has shared. So I know very little, but higher education does not seem like a trend that occurred. And even through my ancestry results and reaching out to different relatives and all of that, it doesn't seem like. But like I said, seeing my siblings and the generations after, my nieces and nephews and my great nieces and nephews, and how they have finished and got their GED and started certificate programs. So I'm seeing some of that there. And I would even highlight, so my foster care experience, I lived with a handful of foster homes. My last foster home I aged out with. I entered that home when I was about 14 years old, 13. I was 13 years old. And I stayed with them until I aged out. I still identify them as family. While I was with them, though, I did leave their home twice to go to a foster home and come back, but that's a whole nother story we probably won't get to today. But I share that because they have played a huge role in my upbringing, especially in those years as I was considering what my future would look like, as I was considering college, and even while I was in school, right? And they did not finish, they didn't attend higher education. So my foster father finished high school, but my foster mother, she, and she's now in her mid-70s, I believe she finished school in around elementary, middle school. And this is back in the day. And this is in Puerto Rico. So I grew up in a home where, there wasn't certain higher education discussions, even while I was, like I said, looking at the options, and even being in school. However, one of the big influences in my life was a neighbor. So a neighbor, Dr. Nikki, she's like a godmother. She's a mentor to me. She is an African-American woman who has her doctorate in education, and she is very successful career-wise and with her education. And so she was a cheerleader for me when I really didn't have many cheerleaders around. She was a cheerleader to instill that I was capable of going to college. She was, even though I barely enjoyed school, didn't really attend high school, had a horrible GPA, she encouraged me. And when I came back from that college tour, she's like, absolutely go to Bennett. She had some knowledge of Bennett College. And so she encouraged me to go to college, and even continued after I graduated undergrad, and I did a post-bac program where I did some research at University of Massachusetts on the child welfare system. I was looking at graduate school, and it looked like I had to take out loans, but a lot of loans, because I was looking at University of Michigan, which is where I ended up going, but I was looking at different very expensive graduate programs, graduate schools. And it was this mentor, this neighbor, who said, because I said, I don't know, would I be making a bad decision if I take out these loans? And she's like, you're going to do what you want, but she made this one statement that was, if you're not going to invest in yourself, then others won't. And she said something along those lines. And those words still ring true to me with a lot of things that I do, because that was the moment I said, okay, I've invested in myself in a lot of other ways, but now it's time for me to invest in myself financially. And so anyways, long story short, I had this neighbor who encouraged me, and going to that graduate program and getting my MSW was a very, very, very wise decision, and has helped me accomplish so much and gain me so much perspective on my work. So, and not just that, but my network of folks. Going to Bennett College, part of that wonderful experience, it gave me a network of sisters, my family, my chosen family, who will show up for me and are my cheerleaders. Same thing with Michigan. Even that post-bac program that I did for 1 year, it gave me a network of folks who are my family, are my friends, are my associates, are my network when I want to look at other career opportunities. I mean, it's my world. And so that's one of the things that came out of those experiences. But I owe a lot of that to my neighbor. who just simply had discussions with me, encouraged me, motivated me, and supported me in other ways as well.
I love that. And in the words of the great and late Mr. Rogers, neighbors are special. So like, I love having neighbors who are helpful in that regard. And just can you share with the audience? I'll share as well, but what are your undergraduate and graduate degrees?
Yes, undergraduate, it's in psychology, bachelor's in psychology. Um, and through my research, I thought I would be a psychologist, a child psychologist, but through the research, I saw if I really want to make a change on the child welfare system, specifically foster care, then social work is probably the way to go, especially if I want to continue to do research. And so I then changed my mind and I went on to get my master's of social work at University of Michigan.
Yeah.
So those are my degrees.
So proud of you, alumni. And so I went to the University of Pittsburgh for undergrad. I have 2 degrees from them. One is Africana Studies, and the second is English Literature with a theater arts minor. I was an actress at the time. And then I went on to teach for a few years. I'm a former English teacher and cheerleading coach. And that's going to be relevant in a second, I promise you. But my master's is actually in education administration. I thought that I wanted to be a principal, and then I realized the principals don't have power, so I no longer want to be a principal. But that is not going to be my last or final degree. So I do want to go ahead and get a doctorate. So I'm just trying to figure out which one would be best for me, which one would make the most sense. And I don't know if you've gotten here. We're kind of like moving towards our final chapter, which is the future. I'm still trying to figure out, Deborah, like, who am I without my trauma? And I'm trying to honor that in all of the things that I do. And so I don't want to like continue to achieve just to achieve or just because I can. I want to make sure that it's aligned to my joy and to my higher purpose and passion outside of my lived experience. And so I think I'm just giving myself time. Right. We're going to get there in a second. Right. But I say that because the education aspect of it, you mentioned something earlier in this whole conversation has been bringing to my forefront as someone who used to work with kids and teach kids, specifically in the subject of English language arts, accessibility. Right. And so both of us had the intellectual capacity to access these resources that were available to us. However, it has become very clear to me, not only as someone who is older now, not only as someone with lived experience, but as someone who is an educator who has had to differentiate text and make things accessible to people across all different learning abilities and learning styles and learning histories, that like the things that are offered to current and former foster youth are not necessarily the most accessible. And the same applies to our parents' generation in terms of their access to resources and even further back than that. And so like when you think about this issue of accessibility, especially with your background professionally, having worked in child welfare and been trained as a social worker, do you think there are a few things that our audience members can take away today that will increase accessibility for resources that already exist?
That's a great question. And I want to make sure that I fully understand your question. Because what I'm hearing you say is there's these resources that are out there, but are they actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's resources that are out there, but are they actually, like, have we done everything we can do so that our youth can be successful in using those resources? Is that kind of?
Yes. And think about it. So we are both intellectual individuals. We can read, right? And we can read across an array of different text levels. However, think about these dense resources. If you've ever had to sign up for Medicare by yourself, if you've ever had to sign up for housing assistance or food stamps, or go down to the Social Security office after you've aged out, that paperwork can feel intimidating.
Yeah.
And if you have strong reading and writing skills, oh my goodness, like the self-esteem needed to even do that stuff is huge. Self-esteem is a big issue across K through 12 schools right now. I'll tell you all that. If you can do anything to build the self-esteem of children in your life, please do that. Self-esteem alone can be a huge barrier in people completing applications for help and for assistance and for resources. And so when you think about things like being able to read, being able to comprehend, right? Because you can read, but you can also not comprehend something. So reading comprehension, literacy,
Right.
Can you physically talk to someone who can answer your questions?
Yes. And I think about so much. See, it can be so overwhelming with thoughts because it's like I have so much to
Spit them
so
out. Just spit them out.
okay. Go. No. So, I think about, because you mentioned confidence and how that could negatively impact. But I think about, yes, everything that you shared, like, is the person set up in those ways? What's that history like for this person, either what they've experienced or what they witnessed or others experience, including their parents? Like, is there shame of asking for help? Is there shame for using the supports that exist? Is there shame within our system? Is there shame from our community? Is there shame from our society that says, like, yeah, there's this resource and that resource, but if you need to use that, like, shame on you. And I personally think that there's a lot of shame, not just within the child welfare system, but just resources in general. But when you look at why do we need those resources, why do we need to use those resources, I we so much. But yes, I think that I even look at when I referenced that there was this funding from Connecticut DCF for foster youth to go to college. I think the intentions there were phenomenal. Yes, absolutely. We are the parents as DCF. They are ward of state, right? I remember always saying that when I was a kid, like, I'm a ward of the Connecticut state.
Mhm.
And
Why did we say that? Side note. I mean, like, I knew it too. I said it too. Like,
because that was the language that we were told.
that was what we were called, right? That we didn't necessarily know our case numbers, but we knew we were wards of the state. And so
Exactly.
there's that institutional aspect, the oppression aspect of institutionalization that, like, even for people like us who went on to get degrees, right? Who went on to be moderately successful as children, we saw ourselves as wards of the state.
Yeah. And so with the funding, right, it was great intentions of, we want to provide this college funding. But when I went off to college, again, shouting out my institution, Bennett College, because it was Bennett College that even considered me to attend with the poor GPA and the poor history that I came from. It was the supports there that helped me succeed. And it was so much there. But if for example, I had a friend that graduated from Bridgeport foster care system, went off to a college in the same state in North Carolina, but a different institution, different area. And she immediately, first semester, failed out, lost her funding, went back home, different story. But where were the services, right? And so I think that in a lot of areas, these are discussions that we have seen so much change or progression within our systems, including our child welfare system, of making sure we do have those services. We're not just having the funds, which the funds, we need the funds, but we also have the other resources and practices to be able to set us up for that. And that's just talking about higher education, but there's so many other areas. And it's so easy to be that person, like I said, to feel the shame for wanting the resource, for asking for the resource, for accepting it. Yeah. I mean, I could go on forever about this topic.
Yeah. So I'm hearing the term of destigmatization. That's something that everyone has access to here in this talk today. If you can destigmatize resources, receiving them, needing them, applying for them, using them, destigmatize them as much as you can. And I think that from the work that I've done as an educator, the language that you use is a really easy way to destigmatize things for kids. Like, don't speak about things with a certain tone, or don't use certain words around certain subjects. There's really easy linguistic ways to approach destigmatization that is accessible and that makes a difference in the long term. Okay, I don't want to get us too caught up in this section right now. I feel like we could talk about this forever too. One more thing I'll ask about presently and right now. Do you think that there are any tools or approaches that you did find to be incredibly helpful during your aging out process or even post aging out?
From the system?
The system? from your university, your college? You said they had a great wraparound program basically for people with lived experience from your neighbor. What things basically helped you to succeed? People ask us that all the time because they know that we have lived experience. What made the difference for you, Ivory, or what made the difference for you, Deborah? So like, what are some of those things that you think you could pull out and pluck to give to the people as to what made the difference?
Yeah, I think number one, I always say mentors, people in your life who mentor you in a variety of ways. And when I think about who my mentors were growing up, I think about foster families. I had one foster home that taught me study skills. At the time, I absolutely hated them. I'm like, what the hell? You're making me sit down and do my homework. I never had needed to do that prior. But they taught me that. And although I lived with them for a short period of time, and I did do academically very exceptionally well, and I was in a different school district too, so it was a bit different, it was a little more rigorous. They taught me that. And it was in my freshman year of college that I sat down and I said, how am I gonna, I have all these classes, all this work. I thought back to that one foster home that instilled those study habits with me, that structure that they provided, that routine. Again, at the time, I was young, it was uncomfortable, it felt forced. I felt judged by them that I hadn't learned this and I wasn't obedient. I mean, I could go on about this, but one of the things that I take away is that foster home taught me those skills. Another foster home that my last foster home, I mentioned earlier that I had moved out of that last foster home twice. One of the times I felt like I had a neighbor who was telling me, a different neighbor. So we got some good neighbors, we got some not so good neighbors. Another neighbor who was said to be my foster family's friends told me that my foster parents were only taking care of me for the money they were receiving. Mind you, it's not even that much money. At the time, it wasn't even that much money. In a lot of areas, it's still not that much money. But they said those words and it made me start believing that that was true. And so I ended up moving out into an independent living program at the time and felt like, oh no, you're not going to hurt me. Like, I love you guys. I care about you guys. And I'm hearing this. I need to protect myself. So I ended up moving out. But my foster parents, right, going back to this idea of mentors, they continue to show up for me. They weren't getting paid. They showed up for me. They let me come over on the weekends. They brought me food because little 15, 16-year-old Deborah did not know how to cook. And so they were there. They showed me what dependability was. They showed me what consistency was. They showed me what love was in a lot of different ways. And so mentors were, for me, were foster families who showed up in these different ways, like the neighbor that I've already discussed, actual formal mentors through formal mentoring programs. And so I view mentors as people in your life who instill skills, who expose you to resources, who connect you to the resources, and who expose you to experiences. And this is the last thing I'll share, is that I think it's important for us to expose our kids to as much of the world and as many resources as possible. And I think that and another area of mentorship, I think, is caseworkers, social workers who were in my life, my direct caseworkers who would say, hey, do you want to do this program? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. I don't care about that. And continuously, I remember always saying, no, no, no. And then eventually they asked me for something. I'm like, yeah, I would do that. But they could have very well gave up and said, this youth is not interested in being involved. We're not even going to ask her if she wants to do A, B, or C. And I'm glad they didn't give up on me because of that. Again, I did this like money program where I saved a ton of money before I went off to college. They brought me on that college tour that, again, who would have thought I would have left Bridgeport and went away to college? And again, that changed my life. So making sure that we don't give up on our youth who might be in a stage in their life and maybe just haven't been exposed to the right thing that sparks something for them that can change their trajectory, either for now or in the future. So yeah, I think those are a lot of areas of what was it for me. And I know we'll talk about the future in a second. And I think part of that also is how do you do that as in recognizing that that's what I received, and I try to practice that now of how do I be that person for the system, for individual young people that I work for, and anyways,
But most importantly for yourself.
and for myself. Absolutely.
Yeah. I just want to reiterate that back to you. I think if I could plug some fruits for our audience members and for people who might be currently in care, or you've aged out or you're about to age out, I think the same things that helped me when I was a high schooler, helped me when I was in college, helped me when I was a young adult transitioning into the workforce. Um, Experiential learning, like Deborah already mentioned, having as many experiences as I could get. And so even if they weren't tied to child welfare opportunities, I was engaged in a lot of community nonprofit organizations, whatever I could get my hands on that were free, that was accessible, that accepted me, I did. I did a lot of volunteerism, which I think helped me to contextualize my own experiences and not fall into like victimhood or feel like, I didn't have anything to give back into the world. It gave me a chance to give back, even though I also needed a lot of giving and tending to myself. I think I namely did that through Big Brothers, Big Sisters. You said you were in Big Brothers, Big Sisters as well.
As the mentor.
Oh yeah, okay, yeah. And so like that giving back really, really helped me through those really difficult times and during that time period. Extracurricular activities and experiences allowed me to find things that brought me joy, allowed me to find ways to sustain my physical health and well-being, like trying different sports or different dances or art and expression. It gave me a positive way to interact with my emotions and my feelings and to explore. One thing that I think is not traditionally thought of, but I think is so important is trying things and failing, right? And getting the chance to walk away from things. So, maybe not every kid is going to become a professional golfer, but they should get to at least try it once. Or maybe not everyone wants to be a marine biologist, but by golly, if they can go scuba diving, let them go scuba diving. They don't have to commit to something for the rest of their lives, but it doesn't mean that the experience isn't going to be invaluable and it isn't going to expose them to new parts of themselves and new experiences within the overall world in general, whether that be a job that they come across again later in life, whether that be something that piques their interest and comes back around 10, 15, 20 years later. All of those things are super, super duper important. And I mentioned this a little bit before, but my friendships, my peer relationships were incredibly, incredibly influential in my life. I surrounded myself with people who were successful, who knew things that I didn't know, who did things that I've never experienced, but through being friends with them, I got to experience them, who had parents who would willingly like loan themselves to me occasionally, so
Invite you to the holidays.
yes, you know how many Thanksgivings I've been to? So that was
They're like, wait, where are you? You're not coming this year?
where's Avery? Oh, she was okay, we'll save her a plate. She's always welcome, and so that was a really beautiful, helpful thing for me. In art, I've always been an artist myself, so giving that having that space to create things, to explore feelings in a constructive way, in a beautiful way, in an experimental way, was super duper helpful for me. And these are all things that are easily accessible, whether it be through public school or child welfare opportunities or nonprofits in the community. I think that these are things that people can access hopefully wherever they are.
Can I add one thing before you jump to, are you going to jump to the future?
No, go for it.
Okay.
We're
So
gonna
you
live
had asked the question, but we've been on a roll. You had asked the question, like, who are you without your lived experience? And we are not ignoring the chat. Things are popping up. So we'll definitely, when it's time for Q&A, like if we miss something, we'll definitely go back and answer any of those questions. But I saw a comment in there that made me think about that question. And I was like, I want to answer that question because I think it could be helpful. So, and it's all connected because as you're chatting about your experiences, it triggers thoughts. Anyways, straight to the point, Deborah. So
You're fine.
who are you without your lived experience? Because it's such a great question, because when your lived experience drives your passion in your career and your work, it's such a big part of your identity. And I think that whether you are an alumni like us, and even if you're not an alumni and you work in this area and it's a big part of your identity and you're super passionate about the child welfare system and improving the system, and sometimes it could be really heavy, I think it's important to have these other aspects of your life that don't involve this area. And so who am I? And I saw a question about success and happiness, and it made me think, like, that's who I, so outside of this area, Deborah loves to travel. Deborah loves to explore outdoors. Deborah loves to just try new things. I'm always trying something. If you ask me to go do something 99.9% of the time, I was like, oh, I would love to try that. Where are we going? Where is it? What time? And so I'm very adventurous. And, I share this because I think for a long time, I worked really, really hard to find what brings me peace and joy.
Mm.
And I think we deserve this
Yeah.
as former foster youth who have lived a life full of just a life of trauma, a life of being a part of a system and feeling controlled by the system. I know for me growing up, I very much felt so controlled by the system. So while aging out caused a lot of other things, one of the things that I appreciated was no longer being under the control of this system and having a sense of freedom. But anyways, I think I worked so incredibly hard to find this peace, find this joy, and doing the hard work internally and externally. And I think it's important for all of us to do, and we deserve it. And part of that journey can be making tough decisions. And so to share a little piece of this, it was through those experiences that I shared earlier that exposed me to travel. Prior to going away to Bennett College, I did not travel. I didn't even travel much in my state. So it's always interesting when people ask, like, oh, Connecticut, have you been here? Have you done this? I'm like, no. Or even outside of Connecticut, I'm like, no. I didn't travel growing up. I didn't get that privilege and opportunity. However, when I was in undergraduate, I was exposed to travel. They had me flying out to talk at conferences, and I was a part of all these different opportunities. And I said, whoa, I studied abroad twice. I studied abroad in Spain. I studied abroad in Costa Rica. And my love for travel, for adventure, for seeing different cultures, for all of that was created there and has continued on. And that's where I now have, found my joy, found my peace. And the last thing I'll share around this is, and I say I worked incredibly hard to get here because some of that, it took sacrifice. It took sacrifice for me. I've moved a bit, right? Like I've had to move from going away to college, doing that post back in Massachusetts, then going to graduate school in Michigan. I now live in LA. So there's sacrifices along the way, and even sacrifices to find my inner peace around dealing with trauma that I've always been very good at suppressing. That's how I've been successful in getting where I am. How I've been successful, and the question about success, how I've been successful in achieving things, how I've been successful in keeping my cool together, how I've been successful in appearing well, how I've been successful in all of this has been oftentimes suppression. And so it was in my later years that I said, if I want to find true peace and joy and happiness, I need to do the hard work, and I need to face some of that previous trauma and go through and process some of that. And part of that was a result of me ending some of those relationships with my biological family, and ending other relationships, and then being vulnerable and deepening some relationships in my life. And so saying all that to say, that's who I am outside of my lived experience. That's who I am outside of this career I've decided to, and this passion of mine of giving back to the child welfare system. And if there's, other alumni on this call who, are also exploring that, just knowing you deserve to find peace and joy. And that's it. Yeah.
Thank you. So many things. My goodness, there's so many things. I promise y'all, we're going to get to the future. We're going to get to your questions. But let me answer too, like, who am I without my lived experience? And this is something that is like near and dear to my heart, because I think that me and you are at critical stages in life where people either turn for the better or turn for the worse. So meaning they either unpack and undo their trauma, or they just, you double down in it and continue to carry it with them for the rest of their lives. And it sounds like we're both along aligned with cycle breaking and breaking those unhealthy dynamics for ourselves and for our futures. And so who am I without my trauma? I'm giving myself permission to explore that and figure that out. I'm realizing that, you know, my worth is not tied to my success. It's not tied to how many awards I can, you know, accumulate. It's not tied to my accolades. It's not tied to my degrees, although I'd like to keep getting them. But it's not tied to that. It's not tied to academia. It's I am worthy of love and acceptance and just existence just because I am, and everyone else is as well. I am someone who also loves to travel. International travel is my favorite thing. So I try to do a new country every year. This year it was Guatemala. And so I love, love, love to travel for many, many reasons. I think that the privilege we wield as Americans with American passports is immense, and you won't feel that until you leave the country and go somewhere else. Even though foster care was really, really hard, it still doesn't compare to the way that some people live their lives in other countries. We're just very, very privileged to be in America and have experienced foster care, the good, the bad, and the ugly in comparison to the lack of infrastructures in other countries for kids who have marginalized backgrounds. I love vegan food. I love adventures. I love long walks in the park. Not really, because I'm not into bugs, but I love fashion. I love beaches. I love finding new ways to take care of myself. And I'm really in a stage of also deeply learning to receive from those who love me, like my sisters, things you wouldn't think that you'd have. Like, oh yeah, you let your sisters give to you. No, listen, I got laid off a few months ago, y'all, before I got this position. I was like, I'm rather than stress myself out about having $2,000 rent in a very expensive city here in America, I'm going to go home and let my sisters support me and give back to me. And it has been much more complicated than what it should be. Just putting myself in a position to receive. And they love me. They love me so much. And I'm roommates with my nephew now, who's 10 years old, and he also loves me so, so much. But it took a lot for me to get here and to be able to receive that help and to accept that support and that unconditional love. And so I'm learning how to be deeply enmeshed in that. And it is difficult. Also, choosing to not be in a romantic relationship right now. I was engaged a few years ago, realizing that relationship, although he was a beautiful person and we had a beautiful connection, he did not have the leadership skills that I wanted. Realizing that early, breaking that system of having children with someone who I don't feel like is equally yoked with me is something I feel like I've, broken in a lot of ways. And it also freed me up to be able to do more of this emotional work. A lot of people my age are distracted with parenting or marriage, and I don't have those distractions. I get to just keep working on me and building up Ivory. So that's who I am without my lived experience. We could go on for days and days and days about it. But speaking of such, I want to go ahead and jump into the future. Before I do that, one more thing. We've talked a lot about higher education here. And as someone who is a former educator, yes, higher education can be a beautiful thing. Post-secondary education can be wonderful, wonderful. It is not the path for everyone, and it doesn't have to be the only way to success. And so I will not sit here and tell you that you have to go to college, you have to get a degree to be able to have a successful, healthy, happy life. That is not the only way. There are other ways to live successfully, to support yourself, and to walk in your purpose and your joy, and give yourself permission to live. And that could look like trade school, that could look like entrepreneurship. It's going to require some kind of work, but post-secondary is not the only way to get there. So I do want to throw that out there for people. And as a teacher, I said the same thing to my students. So I'm not just out on here BSing y'all. This is something I truly believe. So in looking to the future, we have whole lives left of us, ahead of us, Deborah, like a whole life left to live. We are young still, even though child welfare doesn't believe that. What do you hope people take away from your story? But before that, is there anything that worries you about the future?
Do you already have an answer for that one?
Of course I do.
All right, you go first with that one.
I think I try not to put too much attention towards worries, right? Because it's not the best use of our time and our resources. However, it is real. I worry that I haven't done enough work. I worry that things out of my control will happen to my children. So I think about that all the time. I'm like, oh, How can I, some things you can't avoid, some things you cannot avoid, right? I worry about not making enough money, even though I have all these skill sets and talents and degrees. It's just not enough money. I don't know what's going to happen. I do not know. I'm a highly qualified person, but I need more money. And I worry about, when I die, did I give myself permission to do all the things that I wanted to do?
Mm.
Did I give myself permission to feel all the things that I wanted to feel? And I think I have an inkling that I would live to be an old lady. It won't make sense. It won't statistically make sense, but I think I want to live a very, very long life. So I worry, and I try to put myself in positions to where I won't have to ask those questions. I want to try all the things. I want to be brave. I want to push myself. And I want to continue to do that throughout my entire life. So those are kind of the worries. What about you?
Beautiful. Oh, it's such a hard question. It's a hard question because I think so I also try not to worry. Whenever I experience worry, I try really hard to go back. And this is probably defense mechanism, right? But whenever I experience worry, I try really hard to do something about it, create an action. And when it feels out of my control, I try really hard to tap into I wouldn't say I'm necessarily religious, but I do believe in a higher being. I believe in God. I believe that I have had this, like, some kind of ancestor that's a guardian angel that has just been by my side. Okay. I really truly believe in all of that, and I believe in manifesting. So, and again, a lot of that could be defense mechanism, because I don't want to allow myself, and I've learned that, like, I don't like to allow myself to sit in the feelings that don't feel too well. So the worry, the sadness, I go to action. So this is a really challenging question. If anyone else is listening right now who's like, oh, I can relate, it's really, really challenging to answer. But if I'm going to be real vulnerable with you and say, okay, I hear you, but what do you worry about? I worry that I won't make the impact that I've dedicated so far my life to. Like, I feel like I've dedicated so much of my time and energy to the work that I do and the impact that I want to make on our system, in our society. I do worry sometimes that I might not make that impact that I'm hoping for, whatever it is, right? Because I don't fully know what it is, but I'm worried that maybe I won't ever make that impact I'm striving for. I worry that I won't be able to, although listen, I'm manifesting it's going to happen.
We're
I
manifesting together.
that I worried that I won't be able to afford a home. And, so I relocated a year and a half ago to Los Angeles. I got this remote position with Fostering Media Connections almost 2 years ago. And similar to your experience, I had depended on a friend, and was living with a friend for a little while. Anyways, that's going too much in the weeds there. But I relocated here, and I just really had the goal and dream to have a home here in the South Bay of LA. And partly because I want to be a homeowner. I want that. I want that for the little Deborah in me. I want that for the healing of the little Deborah in me. But I also want it because I really want to become a foster mom to teenagers. And I need space for that. I need space. I need space for me for that. And I need space for the kids for that. And so anyways, I worry that maybe that won't happen and I won't be able to buy a home because our economy and our salaries are just not lined up for our generation. Okay. So,
okay, listen. We're going to get off that soapbox. I have two more worries. Can I share two more worries?
Absolutely.
Okay. This is an old worry, and I want to share if there's anyone who's still in this stage of life from when I was like a transition age youth. I had a worry that I would become like my mother. I would get mental illness, right? And I think for a lot of people who are children of people with mental illness, that is a big, big, big worry that like you don't want to be, for lack of a better words, and I know this is not inclusive language, but you don't want to be crazy like your parents, you know, but that is something very real. My siblings have expressed to me that they've had those feelings and experiences too. And so that was an old worry. And a lot of mental illness is diagnosed around the age of 26, 27. So I'm kind of past that age and stage to where it's not an active concern anymore, but things can skip generations, right? And so like, how can I continue to facilitate healthy and wellness in my own self and set that up for my future children? So it's no longer a worry, but it was something that for a very long time was a worry. But another thing that I worry, and I have a feeling you might resonate with it.
Oh, let me see if it's what I'm thinking, because I have one more worry to share.
I worry that I'll have to settle.
Oh,
I worry that I'll have to settle. I worry that I'm asking for too much. I worry that, you know, who am I to have the audacity as a Black woman to want these things for myself? Who am I to want a higher salary? Who am I to want a man who is unselfish and holistically well and who has the same accomplishments as I do? Who am I? Who am I to want great things? Who am I to want to own a house? Like, who am I?
mm.
Am I asking for too much? You know, and I feel this is an issue of like identity and marginalization for sure, but I definitely feel like I'm successful and I've been successful, but I also have gotten like side eyes and pushbacks like, you know, you already got enough. Chill.
Mm.
You're asking for too much. You're doing too much. And have I? Have I
Mm.
asked for too much? Am I doing too much? So I worry. I worry that I'll have to settle or that I'll have to compromise in ways that other people wouldn't have to or wouldn't consider or wouldn't think about. Um, yeah, and that's an active worry. Okay, go ahead. What's yours?
All right, last one. And hopefully we're not stressing folks out with our worry.
Drink some water, y'all.
People.
Take some
Okay,
deep breaths.
okay. Because we worry, but we're hopeful, right? So make sure we
Hopeful,
still
sure,
the hopefulness.
empowered. Yeah, but there's
Yeah,
still
yeah,
worries. It's
yeah.
like, you know, two, what is it? The two realities, two things can be true at the same time. You can be
Exactly.
empowered, you can be
Exactly.
hopeful, you can have concerns. This is real. We have worries and concerns. So
And I'm loving the chat. I keep looking. Okay, my last worry I'll share, and that is super relatable to what you just said, and you are worthy. Okay. And I feel deeply about that, but anyways, my last worry is that I will not get to experience unconditional love. I feel like I had an opportunity to experience that with my family of origin, but because of being removed due to poverty and being placed in a system that completely destroyed the potential of feeling that from that family of origin, and because of all of the things that could have gone better and foster homes could have been better prepared and all of the things, I didn't feel that and never felt that from any of the families. I haven't felt that. I have never felt the unconditional love, and I worry that, and I feel like I have it within me. I have this abundance of love that I'm ready to provide, whether that's to a partner, to biological children of my own, or even the foster teenagers that I want to have, that I want to care for. I know that I have it in me and I want that, but I do worry that sometimes things might not line up and I won't get to experience that.
that is very real. And we're going to have to come back to this conversation because you're bringing up inner child stuff. And we didn't talk about it here today, but I feel like we've talked about it before. And I definitely think about it all the time. My inner child work has been a really big, important part of this journey and how I got to be here. And just acknowledging and holding space for little Ivory and little Deborah is such an important part of this conversation. They have been with us throughout this entire time, throughout this entire conversation, even if we didn't name them. So come back for part two. So here's our final question for the future, and then we're going to dig into this chat. And please feel free to drop your questions, your comments, your concerns in the chat. We'll get to as many as we have. We have until about 28 minutes from now. So we have about a significant time left with you all. But our final question for the day from my side, Deborah, is what do you hope people take away from your story?
and I know there's so much I didn't share today that is in my brain, and I'm like, I want you to take this away, but I didn't share it, so you don't know it. Um, but what do I want folks to take away? I want our either current or former foster youth, other alumni who are in the chat, to recognize that they're, and to feel and take away from my story, and my vulnerability today, and my experiences, that you are not alone. Although at times it could very well feel that way, there is a community of us who exist. So that's number one. Number two, who also are open, to always to being a community. And there's so many different alumni communities out there, foster care communities out there, whether it's Facebook groups and chats, and whether there's more direct, there's just so much out there. So if you are feeling alone, if you do want to feel like join a community, I mean, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy to direct you. We're happy to have conversations with you. So making sure that folks don't feel that way, because oftentimes there's been times where I have felt alone in this journey, and I've been fortunate enough over time to see that I wasn't alone from some of a young age. There were different things that the state did that brought us together throughout the state, and I would see a couple of times throughout the year, like, wow, there's these many kids who are also in foster care. Anyways, not to go too deep in here, but so you're not alone. There's networks out there. I would hope that folks who listen to my story today, I mean, there's just so much. If there's things that we shared today, that if you're on the agency side, if you're a caseworker, or if you're an agency leader or professional, and there's things that we shared today that we said that could have gone differently, or things that were successful for us, and maybe it's something new that you heard, that you'd walk away and you'd consider, consider whatever that is that we discussed. And again, as always, if there's something you want to chat with us further about, we are always happy to have a chat and share more. And I guess the last thing I'll share is just hope. I think that it's so easy to lose hope with so much, like individually, within this child welfare system. I mean, just even globally, I know the last week, 2 weeks has been feeling so heavy on my heart with what's happening globally. And I think it's important to honor those feelings, although I know I still struggle, and I struggle, but I'm so much better at allowing myself to feel the not so good feelings. But I think it's important to allow yourself that, but also to still hold on to hope. And so hopefully you all are, leaving this feeling filled with knowledge, but also with hope. So I guess that's what I hope people take away. What about you?
Yeah, I think that if there's a few things people can take away from my story, would be the power and importance of literacy. So making sure that your clients have access to basic reading, writing, comprehension skills. I think that will take them a long way, not only during their time in care, but after care, and in whatever paths they may choose to walk. Advocating for programs that are going to be accessible throughout one's lifetime as well, because not everyone knows at 18 or 21 or 26 what they want to do and how they're going to get there. So if there's any way to offer resources to people with lived experience, not having caps on them, giving people the time and the space to come back to them as necessary, I think is crucial and important. I think an overarching theme from my life and the things that I've been able to overcome is also tied to mental and emotional intelligence and cultivation and nurturance. And so whenever you can help youth with lived experience develop and further their knowledge of mental and emotional health, but also work through the things that they're experiencing with their mental and emotional health, it'll take them throughout their entire lifetime. And then I think, there's a million things we could talk about. Also, if you do want to further the conversation, send me or Deborah an email, and we'll gladly talk about how we can be a support in your organization or in the work that you do, or give you ideas as to how you as a direct practitioner can help these things happen. The last thing I want to leave you with is the importance of play in the development of children, young adults, and all of those. Like, play is so important. Play is how kids learn and grow and explore and experience the world. Play is how people develop healthy coping mechanism skills, and that's where resiliency is developed and refined. And so giving youth the opportunity to play and to be children and to have that freedom and that comfort in playing is crucial and critical, and everyone has access to that, right? So whenever you can, give a kid a chance to play and be a kid, and that will also take them very, very far. Okay, y'all have been a wonderful audience. We're going to try to see what's going on in the chat. I see that our contact information has been shared. Please feel free to reach out to us, connect with us on social media, connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all of those things. Just a quick reminder about safe spaces. I want to remind you, Deborah, and myself that we don't have to answer anything that feels uncomfortable. We don't have to talk about anything that feels uncomfortable. And let's not share stories that aren't our own. So let's try to just focus on like our own lived experiences and such. And I would ask the audience to be also just mindful and respectful of the questions that you asked too, which it seems like you have been at this time. So are there any questions? Are there any comments? Are there any concerns? We have about 20 more minutes left with y'all awesome people. I'm trying to see, have I missed anything? I know you said there was a question earlier about success. Let's see.
I see so many kind and thoughtful remarks. So thank you all for not just saying kind things about our discussion, but also sharing kind, also vulnerable things that you all are sharing about yourselves, your own stories. So I see that, I hear that, I read that, and we appreciate it.
We hold space for that. I see Tisa, and if I'm mispronouncing your name, please feel free to correct me and help me out. Tisa said, hello, and thank you both for this webinar. I would like to know if you have statistics on what reasons kids end up in foster care. Examples, drug abuse, homelessness, physical abuse. As of now, I don't have any off the top of my head. Deborah has done more direct research with that, so you might be able to answer a little bit better. We also could start sharing some statistics on our social media if that's something that's interested. So let us know if you want us to start sharing some more stats online about things like why people end up in foster care. But Deborah, do you have anything you want to add from your research?
So what I'll say is, and research has improved over time, right, in capturing this, and it's not perfect, and there's a lot of different resources, so we can follow up and share some of those resources in a couple different formats. But in terms of how the state has defined, in terms of what do you check off of why children come in care, the number is extremely high. I don't want to give the wrong current number. And again, you could look at research and the number could vary across different those who do research. But the number is very high for poverty, for neglect. What that neglect oftentimes being poverty, it's very, very, very high, with the other reasons being much lower. And at the same time, the reason why a child comes in care could be for one reason, and it's through over time that we find that there's additional things that this child experienced. So they could have came in care for physical abuse, and we recognize that there was also other, other forms of abuse or neglect happening. But that's just a little background. I don't want to give the wrong numbers. I'd rather have things pulled up, but we could definitely share that with you guys.
Right. We also know that like race plays a big role too. There's a disproportionate representation of African American and Indigenous kids in foster care compared to the general population. So there are some demographic markers that can make youth more susceptible to the system. Dennis said, wow, you just hit upon a very important consideration. A mentor can point out, list resources, but is the mentee in a mindset place to access and utilize the resources? Do we need to assure also that the very basic mindset is there?
Yeah. It's a true statement, a true question, true topic. I think that it's about, and I shared some of my own personal experiences. In my opinion, the way I respond to this is that there were lots of things that I was exposed to, that it wasn't until later that it was beneficial. And so at a young age, being exposed to several different programs around finances, one of the things that I take pride in is managing my finances really well, being very knowledgeable about my finances. And I can't help but reference some of those things that I learned at a young age, although at a young age, my mindset could have been different at that point. I wasn't receptible to participating in certain programs or any of that. So I share that to say, yes, when you're working with a young person, even if they're not interested at the time or maybe not totally engaged, don't assume that this won't benefit them in the near future or in the long future. That's my opinion. And you never know what could come out of that, what could spark out of that as well. You might have an experience with a mentee and they learn that they're not interested in being an outdoors person, but perhaps while you were outdoors you exposed them to something and they learn that they are interested in another area. So
Thank you. Katie says, as a trainer who assists caseworkers completing transition plans, I am always speaking to normative experiences. We have to offer youth those experiences, or it will be much harder to develop a life or transitional plan with them. Yes, normative experiences for sure. Also modeling like things through your own life and through your own words and through your own actions, I think is super impactful, whether or not you realize it. My students, as much as I wanted them to read and write, the biggest thing they learned from me was how I live my life. And so they would say, "Oh, Miss Bennett, how do you eat because of my hair and my skin and my nails?" Oh, okay, let me talk to you a little bit about healthy eating. We can actually read about healthy eating. Is that going to get you to read? And so modeling for kids, I think, is going to be super duper important. And normative experiences and normalizing things is beautiful, beautiful as well.
I'll share one thing quickly about that. So I mentored, and I'm still informally now a mentor for a former foster youth. At the time, it was through Big Brother, Big Sister. She's older now. She was in foster care, and there were things that the foster home would take away that I did not feel was appropriate for discipline. And luckily, so I felt it was my duty, and luckily through the program, she was able to participate and she was able to participate in the areas that maybe she wasn't receiving at the home. I felt a privilege and honor to be able to do. So for example, it was the end of the school year and she had done pretty well in school, but there was, I can't even remember, the foster home, I can't even remember, but what was important to me was to remind this child that you are a child, and similar to what Ivory said, you deserve to play. You deserve to have childlike experiences. You deserve to be loved. You deserve to be celebrated. You deserve to feel accomplished. You deserve, and even regardless of all that, you deserve because you're a child. So on one of our outing, we went to Cedar Point, which is an amusement park in Ohio, and we had a day of just fun, and it was healing for me too. Okay, it's a healing, and it's mutually beneficial. But it was just one of those moments that I just was important to me to let her know, you deserve, although the messages you're getting at home right now are this, you deserve to be a child. So just wanted to add that.
That reminded me, I have one more thought, and then we do have another question in the chat from Catherine. I don't know if you had this experience or not, Deborah, but there's a bunch of little things that I've had to teach myself as a young adult, as at the age of 33 as well, because I just didn't have any consistent role models to show me that. Things like makeup. Like I wasn't around women who wore makeup. So like, I had to teach myself makeup skills. I wasn't around people who liked fashion like I did or had hair like I did. And so those are a whole bunch of little things that we take for granted and that you typically learn from your mother figure and your sibling groups. But people like us might not have had exposure to it. So like things as small as like makeup or doing nails or learning how to cook, right? Or having recipes in your mind from that's been passed down. These are all tiny little things that don't seem significant and that definitely don't make it on the protocol as like foster parents, but make the difference and are at this point in stage in life, you notice and you feel the difference and you have to be intentional about cultivating it for yourself. Okay, back to the chat. Catherine asked, I had a foster daughter in my care from 3 to 5 years old, and in June, she returned to live with her bio mom and 4 siblings in a shelter. I'm trying to support her family and stay a consistent presence in her life. There are many, many dynamics I can't go into, but bio mom and I have a good relationship overall, and she allows me to be in the lives of all the kids and have my FFD over to spend the night once a week. What advice do you have for how I can best support everyone through the good moments and the bad? What is FFD? Forgive me.
Former foster daughter.
Oh, okay, yeah.
She
Former.
said foster daughter.
Thank
I
you.
think, yeah, that makes sense. She has her over once a week. I mean, the fact that you are maintaining a relationship,
mhm.
you are maintaining a relationship with that daughter, right? That foster daughter. You're maintaining a relationship with that family unit as a whole. I mean, I can't help but just stop for a second and acknowledge that and say thank you for doing that. And it sounds like, I know you said that it's there's many dynamics, but it sounds like overall, you said you have a good relationship. So the fact that you're able to do that and you're willing to do that, yes, thank you. Yep, we're gonna some claps and hearts because we need more of that. So sorry, I just got excited for that part. But what advice do you have for how I can best support everyone? Being there, in my opinion, and obviously Ivory, you could go, but like I think just being there, you don't know what can come out of this, right? You don't know I mean, you might already know that, you might even hear it sometimes from the family or from others, but you really never know what impact you're making right now in their lives and in the future and what can come out of this. So I think you're doing enough by just being present and being available and ooh. All right, Ivory, what do you got to say?
I agree. I would second that. That showing of unconditional love is going to take that, not only that former foster daughter, but that whole family very far. And I think also if you want to get involved legislatively, voting for politicians that align with your beliefs, that support legislation that supports families like your former foster daughter's family.
And you're teaching so much. Like you're showing and you're teaching that you can maintain healthy relationships. You're showing that to others, and you could be a mentor and a leader within the system, but you're also teaching this to this young girl, the child that comes to your home. You're teaching it to the family. I think the only mindful thing, if you're not already being mindful, that I think sometimes we could have amazing intentions and not even realize that sometimes our actions or words we say could negatively impact. The only thing is, and I know you said you have an overall good relationship, but the only thing that I would challenge you is to make sure that as long as this child is safe when they are with their family of origin, that you are not speaking, regardless of your opinion, you are not speaking badly of this family, of this child, of this mother. And I'm sure and hope that you're not, but I just want to give that, because I think that oftentimes, we could become very frustrated and we could really want what's best for that child and not realize that sometimes the things that we say out of love and care is coming out of judgment, and it's causing the child to feel torn. And that's something that I did experience at different points in my life. I felt ashamed of my family of origin. I felt constantly torn between, like, you need to choose either, you choose your biological family, you choose your foster family. So anyways, just from some personal experience and also what I've seen as a working in the field myself, is just being mindful of language we use, especially in front of our children, and making sure that you're being as educated and trained as much as possible by attending these kind of webinars, by attending other tapping into other resources about best practices of how to best communicate, how to best support. And this goes not just for you, but parents in general, foster families in general, workers in child welfare in general, making sure that you're, properly trained and knowledgeable.
I think that sums it up. We do have two people raising their hand. I wanted to acknowledge Dennis's comment. He said to my question of, do I deserve Marianne Williamson? Yes, her poem, Our Deepest Fear is That We Are Powerful Beyond Measure, I think definitely is something that could uplift me. And let's see, I don't know what it means when people raise their hands when they are in a panel presentation.
Is it accidental?
I don't know. Can we get help, Abigail? I don't know how to.
You can raise a hand, but if you did raise your hand and you do have a specific question.
Oh, allowed to talk. Okay, I see. Marcia, I'm gonna let you speak first. So go ahead, please.
Oh.
I'm gonna try to unmute you. Give me 1 second. Okay, you should be able to say.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good
I
afternoon.
am a foster parent. I have I'm with Fresh Start. I have a 3 and a 5-year-old. But my question is about my previous placement. They were 4 and 6. I had them for 4 years, and then they went back home to mom. And I'm inside. I'm struggling, or they're in the same position they were in 4 years ago before they came to me. They mom has been gracious enough to let them stay in my life. I was before I got my place.
Oh,
I think we might have lost.
I know she was a little choppy, so she may have lost service.
Yeah, if you can hear us, please feel free to drop it in the chat too. I think she was getting at kind of sending kids back into maybe unhealthy dynamics, right? And to that, I think that all you can do again is be a source of unconditional love and support. All you can do is be a consistent person in that child and that family's life. And just continue to be the great person that you are, as showing up for being a foster home that kids can come to whenever they need to, and not being a source of judgment or provoking shame in either the kids themselves or their families. And so I would just say, just keep loving on kids, keep being a place of refuge for them, and keep growing yourself as a foster care parent and leader. So yeah, we have one more person with their hand up. Danielle, I'm gonna let you talk. I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Feel free to unmute yourself, Danielle, and ask away.
And if you raise your hand by accident, I guess you could just put your hand back down or just let us know in the chat. Oh, she put her hand back down. Okay.
Katie, we're gonna come to you next. Okay, Katie, please unmute yourself.
Hello, good afternoon to everyone, and Ivory and Deborah. My daughter did just walk in the door from school, so you might hear some ruckus. I just wanted to say, as always, thank you, for sharing your story and your vulnerability. I always enjoy these webinars, make it a point to clear my schedule to attend as many as I can. And this one was real for me, and probably many too. And I just wanted to say, I love the questions you asked, especially about those worries and talking about the things that, have contributed to your resilience. And I often am hearing this underlying theme between these webinars, my work currently, friends that I've made through my experience in foster care, the importance of connection when it comes to that resilience, or as I've newly discovered, Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah call it PTSD wisdom. So I want to thank you for asking those very real questions, and also want to just comment on the worrying thing. Is that I don't think, I do a lot of work in New York for establishing permanency, transition planning, a lot of different adolescent services for older youth. And I think that question is often missed. And I also love that you thought of the question, who are you outside of your experience? I don't think we're asking youth that enough. And I don't think we're helping them connect the dots between what has happened to them plays a role in what they are doing. And it, instills a lot of shame when we don't do that. So it's been very healing, although healing might sound like a pleasant word. Sometimes it's really not. It's been a very healing time to kind of uh, experience that myself. And so I just, really want to thank you for bringing that up. And also check out Brene Brown for worrying and so many other things. Love her. Because when we're worrying, we're foreboding joy, right? So I just want to tell you, both are obviously very deserving of all the things you want, and that you worry you will lack. So don't forebode your joy, right? Is worrying going to help you? No. Do you have a reason to worry? No, you're both beautiful people. I would love to have like a dinner party with like you, Ivory, and all the other panelists you've had in the past. So that's just, my comments there. And also, I think I would love to see a session and even be a part of it if possible, about parenting after the foster care experience. And that's all. Thank you
Okay.
both.
Thank you so much for that, Katie. So parenting from the perspective of people with lived experience, and then them parenting their own children, and or some combination of that.
Yes.
Okay, we can make that happen. We can make that happen. And I will definitely invite you. So if you have any other requests like Katie and you want to hear something specific, go ahead, send us an email, drop it in the chat. We are, again, so very grateful for you being here. You could have been anywhere in the world today, but you were here with us, and we don't take that for granted. So we have a lot of love and a lot of gratitude for not only you showing up, but the work that you do to better yourself and those around you, and the work that you do to make child welfare a better place for those who have to experience it. So thank you so, so much for being with us. Please connect with us as individuals, as an organization. Please come back and listen to our other talks. And I hope you have a wonderful day. Oh, thank you so much, Deborah, as well. So much love to you. So much love. So thank you for being here. Any final words before we let them go?
Just a little plug-in. I mean, for those who are here, who are looking for resources, obviously Youth Voices Rising is a phenomenal program. We have these phenomenal webinars, and there are additional publications that we have within Fostering Media Connections. So we have Fostering Families Today, which is a bi-monthly magazine used as an educational tool, a retention tool for families, foster, kinship, adoptive families. We have online webinars with FFT. We have The Imprint, which is a daily news publication. We have Safe Camp Audio, which is our nonprofit audio hub. So we have a handful of resources in our publications. And so if you want to learn more, check us out online. If you want to ask direct questions, I am the business development manager. So I oversee our subscriptions and our sponsorships. So if you're ever interested, if you're an agency and you're interested in promoting some of what you do, all of the above, just putting in the plug-in, because that's what I oversee. So feel free to reach out to me. Yes, that's all I wanted to share.
And one more thing, very quickly. Yes, Katie, there is a podcast, and I'll be recording and releasing some episodes very shortly, but we also do have a podcast through our Safe Camp Audio. So you can go ahead and listen to all of the podcasts that we currently have, but I will specifically be coming out. I'll be bringing my podcast to YVR. So you can hear many more conversations like this. You can send in suggestions, comments, questions, concerns, anything you'd like to hear or see in that will be covered. I'm open to that. And more juicy conversations will be had.
Juicy conversations. And just to clarify with the podcast. So yes, so Safe Camp Audio is our podcast hub that includes the Imprint, our publications podcast. And then we have a handful of other podcasts that are external folks that discuss similar topics that we have on that podcast hub. One of which is Ivory's, which, like she shared, it's formally coming over to Fostering Media Connections, which is so exciting. So yeah.
Yeah. So if you want to wet your palate, go to safecampaudio.org, look for my episode. I do talk about sexual assault, so there's that trigger warning. And in the chat, we said, do we receive certificates? Yes. So information will be shared with you about certificates in a follow-up email. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Deborah, for showing your strength
Thank you.
and bravery. And I hope that y'all were able to take away some nuggets to make yourselves and the world a better place. And until next time, y'all have a wonderful, safe, beautiful, happy day, and we'll see you soon.